The ballroom erupted in applause as Hassani lifted his Lifetime Achievement Award. Instead of calling for his wife, he reached into the crowd, took his mistress's hand, and pulled her onto the stage. "I wouldn't be standing here without her," he declared. Cameras flashed. His family cheered the loudest. At a table near the back, the wife he'd erased from his speech quietly applauded too, and smiled. It wasn't the smile of a broken woman. It was the smile of someone who already knew the night's biggest surprise was still to come. "Some men marry an anchor," his mother said to the guest beside her, "and some men learn to sail." "He's finally home," Tandiwe whispered, and the front tables laughed. Near the kitchen doors, Chiamaka slipped 2 fingers into her coat pocket, found the soft edge of a card there, and let the laughter wash over her like rain on a roof she owned. His name was Hassani Cole, and for 1 more hour he believed he was the most important man in the room. He did not notice the small things. He did not notice that the waiters found Chiamaka's eyes before they refilled a glass. He did not notice the way the director of the institute, the silver-haired man who had just placed a glass flame in his hands, kept glancing toward that back table like a man waiting on a nod. Hassani watched the cameras. He always watched the cameras. He had never once learned to read the room he was standing in. And in the pocket of a plain gray coat, worn soft at the corners, sat a card that outweighed every trophy in that hall, though not one soul there yet knew why. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. But Hassani had not always been this cruel. 19 years back, he was a line cook with burns on his forearms and a laugh that filled a kitchen, and he stood at a counter on Delmore Street, watching a woman in an apron pull a tart from an oven. The bakery was small. $200 had built it, and a card of handwritten recipes, and a woman named Rainey who was already gone. Her daughter was the one at the oven. Chiamaka did not tell him what she was. She let him find out slowly, the way you let bread rise, that she had grown that one bakery into 2, that 2 had become a restaurant, then a building, then a name that suppliers said with respect. She kept it all under her mother's maiden name, Rainey, and she kept herself in the back in the heat and the flour, because that was where she was happiest and where no camera ever looked. Hassani wanted the front, so she gave it to him. She put him on the line at her newest restaurant. She stepped out of every photograph. When investors wanted a face, she handed them his and disappeared into the kitchen. She told herself this was love, being the soil and never minding the dark. For a long time it was. "We did it, Des," he used to say, forehead against hers, smelling of butter and garlic. Back then he still said we. Then the awards came, and somewhere in all that light he stopped saying we. "I built this," he began to say, to reporters, to investors, to her. She heard it and set it down inside herself, the way you set down a hot pan, quickly, without a sound. The change had a smell to it, too. He stopped coming home smelling of the kitchen. One Sunday at his mother's table, over a ham Chiamaka had baked at 4 that morning, the family showed her the shape of the future. "You should let it go, honey," Yvette said, passing the greens. "All those numbers, all that worry, it hardens a woman's face." She smiled. "A wife who loves her husband lets him shine." Around the table, the aunts nodded like a choir. Hassani studied his plate and said nothing. Chiamaka's phone lit against the tablecloth, a message. The name on the screen read, "Mr. Ibarra, Merchants Bank," and under it 3 words, "Miss Rainey, confirmed." She turned the phone face down before anyone could read it, and she smiled and she passed the rolls. No one at that table saw the screen. That was the first thing they missed. That night she opened the Delmore Bakery alone at 5, as she did every morning, and set her mother's recipe card on the wood counter under the lamp. Faded ink, corners soft as cloth, a sweet potato and brown butter tart in her mother's slanting hand. It was the dish the whole world now called Hassani's. She looked at the handwriting a long time. She did not weep. She just pressed her thumb once against her mother's name, the way you press a bruise to see if it still hurts, and then she began to bake. The first crack came with the morning paper. Miss Thelma brought it, hands trembling, and laid it on the counter without a word. Miss Thelma had known Chiamaka's mother since they were girls in pigtails. She still worked the front 3 days a week, more for company than for pay. There it was, a full page, Hassani and his whites. Cole to publish memoir cookbook, The Dishes That Made Me. Chiamaka read the interview twice. The night I invented my sweet potato tart, Hassani had told the reporter, I was alone in my first kitchen chasing a memory of nobody in particular. Nobody in particular. Miss Thelma's mouth was a thin line. I watched your mama make that tart before you could walk. Nobody in particular. She looked up. You're going to let him print that over her grave? Chiamaka folded the paper along its crease. When does the book come out? He's announcing it at that gala, the big award. Chiamaka slid the card from her pocket, looked at it, and put it back over her heart. Then I have until the gala, she said. To do what? Chiamaka did not answer, but that morning, for the first time in years, she started to watch her husband the way she watched an oven she did not trust. Was it only the tart he was taking, or the whole kitchen? The pieces came through people, they always do. A boy named Elias worked the flagship line, 20 years old, quick hands, no father. Chiamaka had found him 2 years back at a scholarship breakfast, one of a dozen young cooks the Institute had pulled off the street and paid to train, and she had liked the way he cleaned his station before anyone told him. He did not know she was anything but the owner's wife. He came to the bakery on his day off, turning his cap in his hands. Miss Chiamaka, I don't want to speak out of turn, he swallowed. They're changing the name, Rainy House. Mr. Cole's calling it Cole's now. New signs Friday. He said the old name was Sentimental. The boy looked at his shoes. He said nobody remembers who Rainy was. Something moved behind Chiamaka's eyes and went still. Thank you for telling me, Elias, she said. That took courage. I won't forget it. He left. She stood in the flower until the light changed. Nobody remembers who Rainy was. Fondiway came next, and she came to the wrong door. She swept into the little bakery in a cream coat, sunglasses in her hair, and looked around the shop the way a buyer looks at a house she plans to gut. She found a woman in an apron behind the counter and mistook her completely for the help. I'm looking for Chiamaka Cole, the owner's wife. You found her, Chiamaka said. Fondiway recovered fast. She leaned on the counter and gave the smile of a woman who believes she has already won. Then let me be kind, woman to woman. Hassani and I are building something that's about to be very public. I would hate for you to be embarrassed in front of the whole city. She tapped a manicured nail on the wood. A graceful exit is a gift, Chiamaka. Take it while it's offered. Chiamaka wiped the counter in slow circles. What are you building? The future. The tart goes global. A book, a line, 3 cities. Hassani and I created it together. She lifted her chin, and soon everyone will know it. Chiamaka stopped wiping. You created the tart together? She repeated. When? The smile flickered just once. Does it matter? It might, someday, said Chiamaka. Fondiway left annoyed, sure she had frightened a mouse. She had no idea she had just promised a landlord to her face that she planned to burn the house to the ground. But who had told Fondiway the recipe was hers to give away? Yvette made her move in daylight. She took Chiamaka to lunch, white tablecloths, and slid a folder across the linen before the water was even poured. Sign here, sweetheart. It makes everything simple. a buyout, a request that Mrs. Chiamaka Cole release any and all claimed interest in the group for a lump sum and a quiet goodbye. Written as if Chiamaka held a sliver, a small wife being generously let go. They thought she owned a corner of it. Chiamaka turned the pages the way you turn the pages of a child's drawing, gently so as not to tear something that took effort to make. "You've been busy," she said. "We've been merciful," Yvette corrected. "You could fight and lose and drag his name through the mud, or you could keep your dignity and let my son become what he was born to be. Grief over a marriage is natural, dear. It doesn't change reality." Chiamaka closed the folder and laid her hand flat on top of it. "When is the gala?" 3 weeks. I'll bring my answer that night." For half a second, watching that calm hand rest on the papers, Yvette felt cold and could not have told you why. The turn came in the dark of her own house. Chiamaka was passing the study when she heard him on the phone, excited, alive, the way he used to be with her. The door stood open. "It's all handled," Hassani was saying. "The night of the award, I do it live. I plate the tart on stage, tell the story, announce the book, and bring Tandiwe up as co-owner, 50-50, in front of everyone. My mother's got Chiamaka signing. She signs or she gets nothing." A laugh. "Relax. She doesn't understand any of it. She bakes. She has never understood the business a day in her life." Chiamaka stood in the dark hall with her palm flat against the wall. He was going to stand in a building she owned, cook her dead mother's recipe under stage lights, call it his own invention, and hand half of a life he did not build to the woman he'd replaced her with, as a gift, believing every inch of it was his to give. Her breath went out of her, slow and even. She did not go to a lawyer. She had never needed one. It had all been hers, in her own name, in documents older than the marriage. There was nothing to fight. There was only a truth, and the right room to set it down in. She went instead to Miss Thelma, who was waiting in the back of the bakery with a battered shoebox on her lap. "I kept these for the day you'd need them," Miss Thelma said. Inside, photographs, Chiamaka's mother at the first stove, a girl of 12 on a stool beside her, learning the tart, and a stack of index cards in that same slanting hand, the whole first menu, dated decades before Hassani Cole ever held a knife. Chiamaka lifted the top card, the tart. At the bottom, in her mother's writing, a line she had forgotten was there. "For my Chiamaka, so you always know where you came from." Her chin trembled once. She pressed her lips together until it passed and slid the card into her pocket beside the other, both of them over her heart. "What are you going to do, baby?" Miss Thelma asked. "I'll accept an invitation," Chiamaka said. The gala was everything Hassani had ever wanted: crystal, silver, 400 of the most important people in the city, a stage lit like a sunrise, and a small cooking station set up on it so the great man could plate his masterpiece before their eyes. They gave him the flame first, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Institute of Culinary Arts, the quiet foundation that pulled poor children off the street and taught them to cook. He lifted it high. He thanked the city, the critics, his mother. He reached into the crowd and pulled Tandiwe up beside him. "I wouldn't be standing here without her," he declared, and the room roared. Then he crossed to the little stove. "Let me show you where it all began," he said, and the cameras leaned in. He worked as he talked, browning the butter, and the smell of it rolled out over the tables, warm and sweet and 31 years old. At her table by the doors, Chiamaka breathed in the smell of her mother's kitchen and stood up. She did not hurry. She crossed the floor in a plain dark dress, and one by one the tables turned to watch her, wondering who this quiet woman was that the waiters stepped aside for. Yvette half rose. "Chiamaka, sit down! Don't you dare!" Chiamaka reached the steps and climbed them, and the silver-haired director, who had said nothing all night, moved to the microphone with a strange, unsteady look on his face. "Before Mr. Cole finishes," he said, "the woman who founded this institute would like to say a word." The room went still. "Founder?" Hassani said, laughing, a spatula still in his hand. "What founder?" The director did not look at Hassani, he looked at Chiamaka. Then he stepped back and handed her the microphone like you hand something back to its owner. "Miss Chiamaka Rainey," he said. For a moment the room did not understand. Then, table by table, it did. The blood left Hassani's face. "That's my wife," he said into the dead air. "I'm your wife," her voice was low, and it reached every corner. "And I own the building you're standing in, the company whose name you tried to change on Friday, this institute and the scholarship that paid for half the young cooks catering this room tonight." She let it settle. "All of it, in my mother's name, Rainey." Tandiwe had gone still as glass. Chiamaka turned to her, without heat. "You told me nobody remembers who Rainey was." She almost smiled. "You campaigned to my own foundation to give my husband this award. You just never knew whose door you were knocking on." But she was not finished, because the thing on the stove behind him mattered more than any of it. She reached into her coat and drew out the card, soft corners, faded ink. She turned it so the light caught the writing. "This award honors a tart," she said, "the dish that made my husband a legend. This week he told a newspaper he invented it alone, chasing a memory of nobody in particular." She looked at him. "My mother wrote this recipe 31 years ago in a $200 bakery with her daughter on a stool beside her. He learned it in her kitchen from me. He built his whole name on 2 women's hands and erased them both." She read the last line aloud, soft as a blessing. "For my Chiamaka, so you always know where you came from." The silence in that hall was total, and it was there, in that silence, that something in Hassani finally broke, and it was not about the money. He looked at the tart on the plate. He looked at the smell still hanging in the air, the smell of a Sunday kitchen and a woman who loved him before he was anyone. And it all came back at once, the burns on his arms, the counter on Delmore Street, her forehead against his. "We did it, Des, we." He had said we once. He remembered when he stopped. He remembered choosing to. The spatula slipped from his hand and clattered on the stage. "I forgot," he said, and it was not to the room, it was to her. His voice cracked wide open in front of 400 people. "Des, I forgot it was hers. I forgot it was yours. When did I—" He could not finish. His face folded like a boy's. "What did I turn into?" Chiamaka looked at him a long moment, and for the first time all night something in her eyes softened, not into forgiveness, but into grief for the man he used to be. "You turned into someone who needed the light more than the people who gave it to you," she said quietly. "I hope you find your way back. I won't be there when you do." She set the recipe card down on the podium beside his glass flame so that everyone could see which one had come first. "Keep the trophy," she said. "I'll keep the recipe." And she walked off the stage, through a room that had watched her for years and had never once seen her, and this time every eye followed her, and this time they saw. The marriage ended without a war. There was nothing to divide that had ever been his. Hassani signed his mother's own papers in reverse and left with the trophy, the name, and very little else. But it was not the empty accounts that hollowed him, it was the mornings. Neighbors said he took to standing across the street from the Delmore Bakery at dawn, hands in his pockets, watching the light come on in the window and the woman inside tie on her apron. He never crossed the street. He had finally understood he had nothing left to bring her. Tandiwe tried to survive it the only way she knew. She went to the press and told them she had been the true creative force, a woman used and discarded. But the photograph of the recipe card was already everywhere, a dead woman's handwriting, a daughter's name, and the story turned on Tandiwe like a tide. She had spent years attaching herself to other people's light. Now the whole city knew there had never been any of her own. The last anyone saw of her, she was sitting alone at a cafe far from downtown, and on the menu in her hands was a dessert listed as Rainey's tart, and she closed it and did not order. Yvette lasted longest because pride does, but months later she came, quietly, to Rainey House for dinner, an old woman in emerald hoping no one would recognize her. The host seated her at the small table by the kitchen doors, the same seat she had once chosen for Chiamaka. She understood it the moment she sat down. She had taught her son to make a woman small, and she had done it first, and she had lived to be made small in the very seat she built. She did not complain. She ate alone under the noise of a room that no longer knew her name. And when Yvette passed through the dining room that night, Yvette could not lift her eyes from her plate. Chiamaka did not build a foundation with her name on a wall. She had never wanted her name on anything. She put her mother's name back instead, gold letters over the flagship door, Rainey House, in the old script. And she found Elias, the boy who had told the truth when it cost him. "You spoke up when everyone else was lying," she said. "You're head chef now, and I'm going to teach you every recipe on my mother's cards, with her name on every one, so nobody ever gets erased in my kitchen again." The boy wept. Chiamaka only squeezed her shoulder and told him to wash his hands. On the first quiet morning after all of it, she went back to where it started, Delmore Street, 5 a.m., the city still asleep. She unlocked the door herself, tied on her apron, and lit the oven until the small room filled with warmth. Then she took the card from her pocket, soft as cloth, and pinned it to the wall above the counter where her mother once stood, where every hand that ever worked there from now on would see it. "For my Chiamaka, so you always know where you came from." She read it once, she touched the corner, and she began to bake in the light of her mother's kitchen, a woman who had never needed saving because she had owned the ground beneath their feet the whole time. Outside, the sun came up over Delmore Street and lit the gold letters of a name that would not be erased again. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments where you were watching from, and I will see you in the next unforgettable story.